Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I am Jonathan Drapkin. I'm the president and CEO of Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. We couldn't be more excited to announce the creation of our latest initiative, Main Street Hudson Valley, a regional resource center to support and empower communities throughout the Hudson Valley as they find their way through the pandemic. In June, the Pattern board and staff released its priorities as to how to address the severe impacts created by the pandemic. 4 topic areas were chosen: the changing nature of work, the housing crisis, the digital valley and the region's needs, and the need to address and support our main streets. We all remember the images of what empty main streets look like, the pain of shuttered storefronts. We don't ever want to see that again, and Pattern wants to do its part in erasing that image. Main streets are the lifeblood of the Hudson Valley. They are its connective tissue. Each one is different. Each one has a unique personality. From a targeted area in a large Westchester city to the intersection of 2 roads in Sullivan County, main streets embody 3 key elements: commerce, community, and culture. I didn't coin this phrase, but the new director of Main Street Hudson Valley, our center, Pattern's own Eric Pearson, did. You'll be hearing from Eric shortly to explain what the goals and objectives of the center are. In designing this effort, we've had the wonderful support of the Pattern board, its staff, and an amazing advisory committee who collectively have spent decades learning from and advising communities how best to revitalize, reimagine, and redefine main streets. Several members of the advisory committee will be participating in a panel discussion on why Main Street matters. We can't thank them enough. Also, later in the program, we're fortunate to have with us the director of New York State's Main Street Grant Program to remind you of all the grant opportunity the state has to offer. Throughout this event, feel free to use the chat feature to send us your thoughts. We want all of you to be a part of defining this resource and therefore be part of its success. So tell us what you need from us. But before we get to all of this, let me turn it over to Joe Chaika, the executive director of Pattern Center for Housing Solutions, to introduce our keynote speaker. Joe?
Morning, Jonathan. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Very happy to see the large number of participants this morning for our opening annual conference. I'm going to be, as Jonathan said, your moderator and MC for today. We've got a jam-packed session, so we'd like to jump right in. And as Jonathan indicated, make sure that you do use the Q&A box to enter the questions for our keynote, for our panel, and for our special guest later on in the session. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, David Dixon. David is Vice President at Stantec, which is an organization of designers, engineers, scientists, and project managers innovating together at the intersection of community, creativity, and client relationships. Residential Architecture magazine named David to the Hall of Fame as the person we call to ask about our cities. In recent years, he's led planning in post-Katrina New Orleans, transformed strip malls into a new generation of suburban main streets and downtowns, and initiated a broad reappraisal of the role of density in building more livable, resilient, and equitable communities. The American Institute of Architects awarded David the Institute's Thomas Jefferson Medal for a lifetime of significant achievement in creating livable neighborhoods, vibrant civic spaces, and vital downtowns. David and I had a chance to talk a few times over the course of the last few weeks, and I got a sneak peek at his presentation. I'm sure all of you will find his presentation absolutely fascinating. Good morning, David. You have the con.
Good morning. Thank you for your gracious introduction. Let me make the technology work here now. And hello to everybody, and thank you for attending and participating. I am going to set the stage. So you will hear the real content from those who follow. But what I want to do is really emphasize just why Main Streets are more important today than they have, I think, literally been at any point, certainly since the end of World War II. That's a broad assertion, so it'll be my job to make it substantive, and I very much look forward to your questions. Again, the real content will follow me, so stay tuned, but I want to set the stage. So I'm going to talk about make three basic points. First, my assertion, Main Street matters more than ever, and that is to communities, whether you are the equivalent of a Main Street in a New York City borough or that cross street that Joe mentioned. That this is largely because of a new norm in terms of economic development, demographics, et cetera, that have utterly reversed the pressures that depleted Main Street, but in maybe ways that I hope you take as an honor, need more from Main Street today than we needed even before sprawl and the decline that Joe noted. And then some very simple plain urban design thresholds that I think we all have to achieve to manage change, to use Main Street to create the kinds of communities we want. So Main Street matters more than ever, and that's a high hurdle because boy, did it matter. You enjoy the wonderful legacy of this era. One thing I noted when I first had the privilege and honor of talking to Joe, that as one looks at the four priorities that Jonathan mentioned, Digital Valley, housing, workforce, and Main Street is really the key. Unfortunately, I can't figure out how to turn it into a crossword puzzle piece, but I hope the message is clear. If we can make Main Street work, we will make much more progress and much more equitably and effectively with the other three. And I actually have, in recent years, have come to the sense that as our communities change, the forces I'm going to talk about change our communities. They represent tools to manage, to guide the future, to shape the future of our communities. Main Street is the measure of how well we adapt. The photograph to the left is Liberty Village, once the first and one point the largest premium outlet mall in the United States, built right next to Main Street, Flemington, New Jersey. One immediately result is the boarded up Union Hotel that you see to your right. This is the empty Liberty Mall today. This is a wonderful development, controversial. Folks who lived along Main Street didn't look at that density and say, oh, gee, that's nice. This community went through a real community education process. But what I think really amazed everybody is how much people, living, work, investment, wanted to come back into Main Street with the right kind of development and civic leadership. So this is Flemington today and going forward. So what is behind these changes, the new norm? Oh, and I want to emphasize, if I'm not making sense, please send a note in the chat and the moderator will let me know that I need to clarify something, because I'd much rather that I'm believable than that you're sitting there in doubt. So it starts with the economic imperative. This is less an opportunity and more something, actually, it's not an opportunity, it literally is an imperative. US workforce is growing much more slowly today than it did before 2010. In 2040, we'll add fewer net new workers than we did in 2010. The diagram to the right, the chart to the right, basically says that 90+% of net new jobs going forward, or more than 2/3 today, 90% of net new jobs going forward will require some higher education. The US has a talent shortage, a growing talent shortage that it shares with countries across the developed world. Roughly 40% of firms in the US with 10 or more employees today face a skill shortage. We're among the top 15 economies in terms of, you could call them bottom 15 economies, in terms of the severity of our labor shortage. And now think the challenges of maintaining labor when folks can sign up for a job in Singapore if they want. But The bottom line here is that if 90+% of net new jobs require higher education, think what that signals for where economic growth is coming from. New, enhanced economic opportunity. It is our knowledge and innovation industries. These go where talent goes. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a couple of minutes. While hybrid work models, remote work are certainly the pandemic didn't launch this trend. It pulled the curtain away and made much more obvious how strong this trend has grown. While hybrid work is growing, the companies, parts of our economy that are really growing need their workforce to be near the company, near each other, and I mean preferably within walking distance, not a short drive, because it is the creative collisions is the term of art, the chance conversations that folks from different companies have where they each discover that they have a piece of an idea that together represents a new product both companies or 3 or 4 companies will benefit from, that is the real key to innovation growth. One of the things pandemic has demonstrated is that while innovation industries have maintained sort of basic measures of productivity, their innovation productivity, the number of new products, new ideas they can commercialize has dropped by about 50%. And that is because these creative collisions, the chance meetings aren't happening. So what they want is their workforce, if they're not going to be in the office, and most of the HR and R&D directors I talk to say, probably not, and more than maybe 2/3 of them will be, they want this workforce living within 5 minutes, 5-minute walk of where they work, more importantly, a 5-minute walk of each other. And that isn't so hard to achieve because this talent, as it is known, overwhelmingly wants to live in walkable, mixed use, I'll call them communities of innovation. We may think traditional main streets, traditional urban neighborhoods, but think of the power of Main Street and the importance and the responsibility of Main Street going forward to the economy of cities, large and very small, that seek to enhance economic opportunity. And I know this message sounds very elitist so far, so I'm going to add a very important follow-up point. We're doing a lot of work in Buffalo right now. Buffalo's done a lot of research into the multiplier effect of a knowledge industry job. And a new knowledge industry job in Buffalo, and this is true pretty much across the board, creates 3 to 5 jobs for others that require a wide range of skills, in many cases replacing jobs that have been lost. I love this sort of cartoon from the Wall Street Journal, Goodbye Office Parks, drawn by Amenities and Talent. Tech firms are opting for cities. What they're really opting for is brew pubs. There's our former president and the Prime Minister Trudeau toasting each other in the one brew pub in a large innovation district in Canada, in which we're doing planning or tech park to transform into an innovation district so that it can achieve the kinds of qualities that Main Streets already have. Very interesting, whether you talk to workers who would, 55% of whom say they want to be in the office 3 days a week, 45% would like to be in the office less than 3 days a week, or executives who, larger number of whom prefer their employees come to the office. Both of those are very depressing numbers if you're in the business of building office space. However, those numbers are really supporting the accelerating pace of hybrid work. What this means, and I guess I'm really going to re-emphasize here, is that bottom line, innovation companies are now less aware, less interested in, they're still interested, of course, but in the innovation office environment they create, less interested in thinking of themselves as innovation companies and more interested in thinking of themselves as part of innovation communities. And this is a point I'm going to leave here and go on, but I hope everyone in this call at this session can really begin to think more, because it's a conversation we all need to have about the just essential role Main Street will play in helping our communities claim a position in the most important part of our economy in terms of growth and new opportunity across the board. So Luckily, if you're looking at main streets and our communities from this perspective, there are dramatic changes going on in our demographics. So basically, that little house to the right is part of a graphic that says that more than 60% of our housing supply today is single-family detached housing, largely in suburbs, where all that investment went when Joe talked about the decline of main streets. Well, that was for a housing market back in the 60s, 70s, 80s that was dominated by households with kids. 80+% of net new households for the next 2 decades, this is the new norm, will be singles and couples without kids. I have kids, I have grandkids, I love kids. The point is that folks without kids have very, and have always had very, very different housing preferences. They strongly prefer multifamily housing within mixed use, walkable environments. Again, think Main Street, and think of not just the preference for Main Street, but how undersupplied Main Street is with the housing, how much demand, pent up demand and demand there will be over the next 20 years for this housing. Housing is the new future of Main Street, the new future of our downtowns, and in large part because it is housing that really supports retail, walkability, community. Think of the folks that all that talent I mentioned and all the rest of us, talented or not, I think one of the things, if you look at COVID and look at how many folks put on about 4 layers of jackets, certainly I did, to be able to sit outside and enjoy a meal in public along a street whose parking had been converted to outdoor dining. That demonstrated to me more than anything how much we value community and our sense of participating in it and being part of it and seeing it and experience it. Well, roughly 1,000 new housing units within a 5-minute walk will bring a block of Main Street to life. A new interchange won't do that. Another highway lane won't do that. If we can get more housing around our main streets in Flemington, New Jersey, the secret to revival is that all that housing I showed you in the courthouse development and about another 800 units that we could find space for and we could demonstrate market potential for. It's going to take some public-private partnerships to make it happen. That is what is bringing Main Street Flemington back, and it is housing that will drive the life on the street, the places to eat, have caffeine, and maybe most important, beer that really draw folks together and promote those creative collisions, sort of chance meetings, turn strangers into neighbors and friends that are so important for our economic growth going forward. So while it is depressing to see empty space on upper floors, I've had the privilege a number of times of working with Larisa Ortiz, who's going to be on the panel that follows us. We were doing downtown plan for Memphis, and she quantified wonderfully just how much more a resident spends than a worker on 5-minute retail, meaning retail, food, caffeine, shopping, of course, too, beer, than an employee by a factor of, I think it was sort of a 3 to 4 differential in terms of dollars per capita. So this transition is what will help bring main streets to life, not really depress them. I'm going to just touch very quickly on the fact that everybody in this call has heard of something called autonomous mobility. I happen to work for a company that is very much a leader in understanding the impact of mobility innovations. We did a wonderful charrette with the city of Buffalo, looking at how to make sure that mobility innovations, connected, autonomous mobility, didn't reshape our communities the way universal access to automobile ownership did in the 50s and 60s, but instead could be managed as a powerful tool for helping to create the kinds of communities we want. And ask me questions about this, but in deference to time, I will simply again assert that over the next 15 years, the US automobile fleet turns over every 15 years. Over the 15 years from now, but 10 or 12 years from now, this will be the norm. We will live in an era of connected mobility. Connected vehicles park themselves much more compactly. They lend themselves much more readily to shared mobility. It is much less expensive to use shared mobility than to own, operate a car, which costs about $14,000 a year. We will follow that by the era of autonomous mobility in urban areas, shared autonomous mobility. We'll need much less parking to support connected vehicles, no parking to support shared autonomous vehicles. One of the major cost premiums for developing in and around a main street, the need for structured parking, will basically decline over the next 2 decades and disappear by about probably a little more than 2 decades from now. So don't overbuild parking. But more importantly, people who live in compact areas with compact critical mass to support click away trips will have a real mobility advantage. It costs about half as much to live in a shared mobility environment than to have to own an environment. This is a subsidy for living on Main Street or nearby. And of course, climate change dominates our headlines and the thinking, I'm sure, of many people on this call. There is no more environmentally, and I'm sorry, even for areas not affected immediately by climate change, even if they may think of themselves as climate change havens, as Buffalo does, it is making us all much more aware, even than we were before, of environmental responsibility. There is no more environmentally responsible place to grow in terms of per capita emissions, carbon and other emissions, than along a main street or another compact walkable communities. This map to the left is the New York region. The greener, the lower the per capita carbon footprint, the redder, the higher. And you can look at any region across the US and see the same message. What has COVID changed? We did some work with the International Downtown Association to help downtowns recover from COVID, and did a panel. I'd be glad to send it to anybody who'd like the information in a workbook. But more importantly, what has COVID changed? It has not changed, but hastened the decline of auto-oriented retail. It has increased interest in walkable places, particularly access to nature, and again, boy, outdoor dining. One of the best messages I've heard from downtown improvement districts and other downtown partnerships is it's an awful lot easier to get permission from the city to occupy part of a sidewalk and a parking lane with outdoor dining than it was before the pandemic, and that I hope is here to stay. And in many ways, it has helped us realize how our urban neighborhoods, our main streets, in some ways are, this is for larger communities, our new downtowns, because we've been able to find community there. If you live in an auto-dependent environment, much harder to do. But what has COVID changed? And what thing it has, not changed. The most important is those pro-Main Street, economic, demographic, technological, increased awareness of environmental responsibility trends I talked about, which are fundamental to shaping the future of our communities, have not changed one whit. Nor has the growing and rapidly accelerating growth of knowledge innovation industries. And it's very interesting. As office space has declined in a number of major downtowns, tech and innovation has been moving in. They have been net positive leasing space in a number of major cities. I'd be interested to know more about smaller cities and downtowns. And boy, startups, as more folks are working from home, the trend towards startups, which love older space, actually, it's not a loft above retail along a main street. And it has not slowed the growing interest in walkability and in main streets. So I'd like to finish, and so far I see no pressing questions, but again, please ask if you have them, with a couple of thresholds for how do we manage these changes to really achieve our goals for community building, the kinds of goals that Pattern for Progress is so wonderful about enunciating and helping you progress with. So first, it is really building a culture of planning for change. During times when change is moving slowly, community conversations are important, but not nearly as important as they are when our demographics, our economy, technology are rapidly changing and the implications for our communities are profound. Building a shared vision requires lots of conversations. One of the things I love doing is having conversations with communities about density not density that touches a blade of grass on their front lawn, but that surround their main street, help build new walkable downtown districts, et cetera, that bring opportunity to all. But not only that, amenity they can walk to, again, without affecting a blade of grass on their front lawn. Conversations like this so people can see their interest in growing density, in walkability, and the things that we need to advocate for is part of this community conversation that builds a shared vision, matched, of course, with implementation strategies, all of which is about building a foundation of community understanding that provides the political support for the public-private investments, the P3s and essential steps that we all need to take. Genuine walkability, this starts with not trees and bricks or any nice paving, but compact critical mass, the density, that 1,000 units within 5 minutes that really supports lively walkability, gives us as our reward the ability to build on the wonderful design that folks did over more than a century for the downtowns that you manage and lovingly bring nurture. Lively, but also this needs to really combine with lively inclusive programming. I am a big supporter of downtown partnerships, Main Street organizations, business improvement districts, as much as anything else, because the ways they can constantly in new and in interesting ways that are always of the present bring folks together and diverse folks together. Social connectivity. Obviously connectivity matters. Many of you are not in communities that are going to support transit, but programming Main Streets with civic culture, cultural and other programs that speak to the full range of your community. I did a public realm master plan for Miami years ago, and frankly, learned in the process, much more than I probably should have known, how African-American, Black, Latino, and white, and I'm really stepping into dangerous territory here, Miamians use public realm in different ways, and successful public realm spoke to each of them, didn't tell them what they should want, it provided what they wanted, and that's what brought them together. How do we do that on our main streets and our downtowns? And one hint, public art can play an important role. A fully dimensioned public realm that provides places where everyone can come together, where folks can have a quiet conversation, where kids can play, that basically accommodates the full range of who we are as people. And something that you just excel in, not authenticity so much as living authenticity. One thing I love about Hudson Valley and many main streets today, not all, is that they aren't museums of the past. They honor their legacy, and it is a proud legacy, but they celebrate the community's living diversity and its living culture. And a couple of ways that we've done that I always enjoy, we worked out a plan for up to 9 million square feet of mixed use, very cool development in Tampa, Florida. To me, the most important part was this place called Makers Alley, which brought chefs and artists and makers of all sorts together in the heart of this otherwise very glassy, very new, very, you can imagine, corporate world, to bring the living culture of Tampa into the heart of that development. This is a parking garage next to a very cool sort of new urbanist development in outside of Denver. They edged it with parking structures. Then people built housing across the street because they wanted to walk there. How do you make a parking structure not a barrier but a seam? By putting artists in very inexpensively in the ground floor. They spent more on banners than I think on space for the artists as for work sell gallery spaces, but working spaces. They get 25,000 folks on a Friday night doing gallery walks now. All they did was finish a space about 20 feet deep and lose a bay of parking. Working again with Larisa Ortiz in Memphis, they have a wonderful pop-up program that isn't just about pop-up retail, but it's pop-up retail that helps folks, new entrepreneurs, enter the retail market, become part of the face of downtown Memphis in ways that represent the full community. So thank you, go forth, create even greater main streets. I can't say great main streets, even greater. My email address, david.dixon@stantec.com. If you have any questions, And I've got to say, anybody who can find this photo online has got to know that you have authenticity down to just pat. So I look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for your attention.
David, great presentation. It's even better hearing you actually walk through it instead of just looking at the slides. So thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions and a couple of observations. The last part of your conversation, it reminds me of what Richard Florida would start, a few years back with innovation districts, and then he sort of, evolved that to creative districts with makerspace. And here in the Hudson Valley, we do have a lot of makerspace and artists, living and working downtown. And it's great revitalization tools. But when I'm hearing you talk about that, we've got two specific questions that did come up in the Q&A.
Sure.
And I'll read them both to you and like to get your response. The question is how to get elected city council persons and voters to support densification. And the second, can you talk about how to present Main Street change to current communities to alleviate fears of changing the character of the town? And that's a big deal in our historic communities here in the Hudson Valley. I mean, the city of Newburgh itself is the largest historic district in the state.
Yeah.
So what's your response to those questions, David?
Next. No, those are terrific questions. Let me start with one. First of all, to be very blunt, elected officials are not, they don't merely, I'm going to respond to votes. They vote their conscience, but how should I say this? They are who they represent. And the most important thing to do is build a foundation of understanding, the ability to speak to folks not in ways not some things they need to hear, but ways they're willing to listen. So to me, the best way to build and the most effective way to build support for densification is to help people understand, on the one hand, its benefits to them. We did a lot of work in Dublin, Ohio, very affluent, successful suburb based around golf courses. That's not the future of a successful anything these days, to be a little bit direct. The town government knew they needed to build a new downtown, new active Main Street. A lot of concern. This is changing our community. When folks realized that they could get on the city's bike trails or the town's bike trails and ride to get ice cream in the new center, and again, I come back to, in ways that didn't touch a blade of grass on anybody's front lawn, they actually wanted more density. And one of the things I found fascinating is they wanted to make sure that they had pathways to that density. Not roads. They didn't want those folks driving back through their subdivision, but roads. It's all about enlightened self-interest. And I think the case is very strong. Secondly, I'm sorry, I didn't want to over-answer here, but one thing that's been very helpful is to help people understand that many of them bought their houses in a very different demographic era when there was a lot more demand for America's traditional housing stock. One of the ways to keep that demand is to amenitize traditional neighborhoods, whether they're urban or suburban, by giving them access to the walkable amenity that Main Streets provides. And when people understand the role of density in preserving, maintaining, and enhancing that amenity, they become more supportive. And I hope this is helpful. But don't try and do this without the community conversation first.
Absolutely.
How to manage change is one of the challenges of our era, because let's face it, as places become more desirable, they become more expensive. And to be blunt, the things I've talked about are in grave danger of accelerating gentrification. If we don't tackle that head on, and again, have those explicit conversations. So for example, we did a lot of planning in Columbus, Ohio, to create a wonderful new sort of arts-oriented Main Street environment where 30% of the housing was set aside as long-term affordable housing for artists to invite the kind of concentration of artists that really supports the genuine arts community, and B, make sure they could stay there. And there were other steps too. We really have to look at, we create a lot of value. When you enhance the value of a Main Street, you create a lot of value. We have to tap that in value to make sure that we are maintaining affordability. Another dimension of change, of course, is physical character. And I think one of the things that was fascinating about that project in Flemington I showed you is when folks looked at the view from Main Street, it scared them. when the developer said, okay, well, let's show you what it looks like as it steps down to townhouses next to your urban Farmington neighborhood, they were surprised. I wish everyone had started with that view first. But I hope this is enough of an answer. I could keep going, but we don't have a lot of time.
This is great, David. And, you know, we are running a little bit over time. And
Okay.
there is a whole series of questions coming in. So, David, what I'd really love to do is, unfortunately, we have to move on, but we'd love to invite you back in the first quarter of 2022. And we could have maybe another session just dedicated to this sort of a Q&A in what we call, in housing, we call it the Solutions Lounge. So we'd love to have you back.
It would be pleasing. I think we have such wonderful opportunity if we can manage change to accomplish things that I bet everybody in this call or in this meeting believes in, and I'd love to be part of that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. At this point, I'd like to introduce Eric Pearson from Paden for a special announcement. Eric, right over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Joe. Let me start my sharing screen here. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Pearson. I am a senior research planner at Paden for Progress. And for the past few weeks, we've been kind of teasing a special announcement. So without further ado, I am very excited to officially announce the launch of a new initiative from Paden for Progress called Main Street Hudson Valley. We created this initiative because we believe that Main Streets play such an important role in the community. And the Hudson Valley is home to several dynamic, historic, and as David just mentioned, authentic Main Streets. In the past, Paden has done a lot of work in and around Main Streets, but this new initiative represents a commitment to focus specifically on Main Streets and how we can help them reach their full potential. So before we get back to the rest of our speakers, I'm just going to briefly describe what this new initiative will entail. So Main Street Hudson Valley will be a regional resource center. We will provide information on best practices, trainings, technical assistance, metrics, webinars, and convenings. All of these things will be aimed at building up local capacity, which is one of the main overarching goals of this initiative. So in terms of resources, there will be a library of best practices and other educational material on topics related to Main Street. We plan on releasing a regularly scheduled issue briefs to continually expand on that library. And we recognize that there are a lot of existing resources out there on many of the topics that we will be covering. So what we're going to produce is going to focus on how these topics specifically relate to the Hudson Valley. So what we produce will have more of a local flavor. In terms of programs, the Community Rebuilders program is an existing program that Paden has been running for several years. Participants in this program come in with a project for their community, an idea, and through weekly classes on topics like project management, budgeting, grant writing, things like that, we help advance those projects and build up their skills. And we're happy to announce a new program, the Main Street Champions program under the Main Street Hudson Valley Initiative. Similar to Community Rebuilders, it will provide trainings, technical assistance, but with a focus on Main Streets and a specific Main Street at that. Recognizing we have a variety of different types and sizes of Main Streets, a big part of this program will be establishing appropriate goals and helping participants achieve those goals and really advance. Again, there will be an emphasis on building up the skills at a local level so progress can continue after the program is over. So registration will be opening up soon for the Community Rebuilders program. If you think you might be interested in any of these programs, but you're not sure, please reach out to us and we'll share a couple ways to do that at the end of this presentation. All right. Also, in addition to all the things I just covered, we will be looking at some key metrics that are indicators of overall Main Street vitality. So types of things we're talking about could be storefront vacancy, presence of municipal Wi-Fi, taking photographs at key locations, things of that nature. The idea is to establish a baseline snapshot of these metrics and continuously measure them over time so we're able to track the progress of our Main Streets. And we think that will be a very valuable thing going forward and something that will pay off in the long run. Main Street Hudson Valley will feature a series of webinars on topics relevant to Main Street. Maybe something like Joe just mentioned, where we bring David back. Much like the resource library, we will try to focus on how these topics specifically relate to the Hudson Valley. So try to be as local as we can and as relevant as we can. In addition to the webinars, Paden will host the annual Main Street Conference, where we gather industry professionals, local stakeholders, and learn and share ideas about Main Streets. So part of the reason that Paden decided to focus on Main Streets is due to the many ways in which they are important to a community. Main Streets can be a place for social interaction and gathering, place to display arts and culture, or a place to live, or all of them. In many cases, Main Streets are really, foundational to a community's identity. So given the many functions that Main Streets can serve, all of the components of this new initiative that I just went over, we're going to be examining them through the lens of commerce, community, and culture. So that concludes the overview of the new initiative, the Main Street Hudson Valley Initiative. But before we move on, we wanted to take the opportunity to hear from you all about what Main Street topics you think we should focus on. So I believe you should have just seen a pop-up poll show up via Zoom. So please choose which topics you think we should focus on, what you think is most interesting. You can select as many or as few as you want. And this will just be helpful for us to inform what areas of research and topics that we should focus on going forward. So I'm just going to leave this poll up for a minute or two. And when we're all done, I can share back with you real quick what our top selections were. I think there are 10 options, so just be sure to scroll all the way down so you don't miss what's on the bottom. All right, we actually have a pretty even distribution here, some front runners. Results are still coming in, so I'm going to leave it up for a little bit longer. Okay, I think the responses are slowing down. It looks like our top selection is Main Street Business Support and Development, Main Street Grants and Fundraising, Inclusive and Accessible Main Streets, and Commercial Storefront Vacancy. So great, this is wonderful feedback. I'm going to end the poll now. I believe we're going to be able to save those results so we can come back to those later. Oh, here, I can share the results. There you go. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So this, of course, is not a comprehensive list of topics. That's just 10 that we came up with. So if there's a topic that's important to you that you did not see there, please reach out to us. And to do that, or just to find out more information about the Main Street Hudson Valley Initiative, head over to patternforprogress.org/Main Street, or you can, of course, feel free to email me directly. Again, if you think you might be interested in any of the Community Rebuilders or Main Street Champions program, but you're not quite sure, please reach out. We'd love to talk it through with you and find a good fit for you. So yeah, I think I can speak for the whole Paden team to say that we are really excited about this new initiative, and we hope that you are too. We'll bring this contact information back up again at the end of today's event. And at this point, I think I will hand it back to Joe to introduce our next speakers.
Thanks, Eric. So pleased that we're having this Center for Main Street. So great job. At this time, I'd like to welcome our panel of Main Street Aficionados. We're pleased to have today, and I'm going to introduce all four up front, and then we're going to get into some Q&A. Denise Frangipane, Executive Director of the Sullivan Renaissance, an organization offering technical assistance and support to volunteers, organizations, and municipalities working on a variety of projects and initiatives to enhance the communities of Sullivan County. Larisa Ortiz, Managing Director of the public nonprofit Solutions at Streetsense, an organization that creates, transforms, and activates brands and places. Mary Paden, Senior Vice President of Community Preservation Corporation, providing innovative capital solutions, fresh thinking, and a cooperative approach to the often complex challenges that owners and developers of multifamily housing face, especially on main streets. And Jared Rodriguez, Principal at Emergent Urban Concepts, a firm that helps communities and small businesses in the Hudson Valley plan for a better future, while also advising the state of New York on energy and environmental related issues. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Let's start with a very broad question. And I'm pretty certain that you're all going to have a very different perspective, as your work and your work experiences are very diverse. For example, Denise is from a very rural county in the Catskills. Larisa works in many large urban centers in many different communities, states, and islands. She's in Puerto Rico right now. Mary comes from a lending background and certainly understands how main streets play a role in the housing market in the Hudson Valley communities. And Jared has a keen eye on environmental challenges for main streets and does a lot of work in Rockland County and Westchester. The first question I'd like to pose for each of you is, why is Main Street important to you? And let's start with Larisa. Good morning, Larisa.
Hi, good morning. It's such a great question. I actually spent the last few days in the small town where my family is from, in Puerto Rico and Guayama, talking to them about a destination plan that we'd really like to do, which would be a dream. You know, for me, it's very personal, and it comes from the experience I had growing up, being able to walk in this lovely town as a 7-8-year-old, you know, to get my ice cream, you know, as David mentioned. Being given a quarter and you know, an entire day to explore and look at the buildings and history. And so my love of Main Streets really comes from, you know, a real grounding in an experience that, you know, I want to make sure other people have the opportunity to experience as well. And the ability to, you know, it's an 8 to 80 environment. You know, unlike a suburban environment, anyone from 8 to 80 can enjoy without needing to hop in a car. You certainly don't get your license until you're 16 anyway, right? So I think, you know, for me, it's a very human, there's a human element to why these places are critically important.
Very good. Thank you, Larisa. Denise, from rural Sullivan County up in the Catskills. Love your background.
Thank you. This is Narrowsburg, New York, behind me, and one of our very vibrant and I think thriving main streets here in Sullivan County. We have a few, but we also have communities where it's not so much a main street, but more of a hamlet that functions like a main street. So for example, Kanianga Lake would be an example of an area that you wouldn't really define as a typical or a traditional main street, but it serves the same purpose of, as has been mentioned before, and I think speaks to the importance of Main Street. I love that your new center is focusing on the intersection of commerce, community, and culture, because that really sums it up. And that's what we see here in Sullivan. Our main streets, you know, went through and have gone through, as I'm sure many main streets, a change as retail and people's habits changed. But I do think we're seeing a pull back to Main Street for many reasons, the interest in walkability, the convenience of it, but also just that sense of community that seems to naturally percolate there. And so for me, that's what makes Main Street important. It provides a place for people to see each other, see their neighbors, have interpersonal interactions. it provides an opportunity for small business to do the same. It's just a whole different experience when you shop in a Main Street business than when you shop in a big retail space. Not that they're not necessary for some things. And it provides also an anchor and, can stabilize communities. And we're seeing that in the western part of our community in Sullivan, how the Main Streets have become these centers and things kind of branch out from there. And we're seeing that also beginning to trend in the more, I guess, what you would call our urban areas of Liberty and Monticello, our county seat, and the efforts of investing there. Because if the Main Streets are successful, then it leads to other successes around it. And there's really a fluid kind of give and take there. And so they become a critical center point for small communities, but also for the county overall.
Thank you, Denise. Mary, moving on to you.
So Main Streets, I think, represent a significant portion of the village's tax base too, and as well as their historic core of a community. A healthy Main Street core protects the property values in the surrounding residential neighborhoods. A district is often the center of the Main Street in the central district, often the center of government offices and services, attorneys, physicians, and also it serves to be the congregate place for people, to congregate for celebrations, parades, special events. And so a healthy Main Street, is huge public-private investment. I mean, if you imagine how much it would cost just to recreate all the buildings and the infrastructure in your downtown, it would be very costly. So again, like an investment in your home or an investment, you want to invest in your downtown and your Main Street because it does have a reflection throughout the entire community. So those are a few of the reasons why I think that the Main Street is important.
Thanks, Mary. And Jared, let's move over to you.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited about this. I think when you folks brought this to my attention several months ago, I thought that this was a fantastic idea to launch this Main Street Center. So, kind of echoing what Larisa said, but it's the opposite experience. For me, it's extremely personal as well. I grew up in Stony Point, New York, off exit 15 of the Palisades Interstate Parkway, and I was isolated from walkable main streets. I didn't get to have that experience as a child, and it was a strikingly isolating experience. I'm not going to get into it because it's emotional. So I grew up watching films like It's a Wonderful Life, right? And hearing stories from my family about living in Yonkers or Havistraw during the interwar or immediate post-war period, before these places were gutted to accommodate automobiles and suburbanization. And so I knew from a very young age that something catastrophic happened before I was born, and that I was experiencing this isolation because of that. And it's become like my life mission to reverse that kind of damage and the social damage that we're doing to each other because of it. So Main Street is the great integrator of people from all walks of life, right? It's the mechanism that our society uses to socialize people with one another. I mean, it's necessary. It's a necessary mechanism. In New York City, the subway kind of serves this function. You take people from all over the place, from diverse backgrounds, social, racial, economic, and you force them into a subway car with each other, right? So in the Hudson Valley, Main Street is one of the only tools that we have to create that community across these extremely diverse backgrounds. So Main Street is society, right? It's the only tool that we have to create society. And I'd argue that this is necessary across the whole country. And one of the reasons why we are failing potentially is because we don't have enough Main Streets around the United States, or where they were obliterated. And then I just have to note, right, the keynote speaker's mention of carbon emissions per capita in urban, dense Main Street areas. Yeah, like absolutely critical. The fact that we focus so much on electrifying vehicles and electrifying decarbonizing the electric grid, all worthy goals, right? But developing walkable main streets needs to be of the highest priority if we're going to meet our climate change targets.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Jared. You know, you remind me of you're speaking of small main streets along the river. And so, you know, growing up in Columbia County, my main street was in the city of Hudson, which back in the 70s was filled with vacant storefronts, and it was a city in decline. Beacon was a city in decline with a lot of vacancies up until the early 90s when investment started to kind of trigger up again. And you know, in terms of the impact of COVID on small businesses and vacancies, all of a sudden, some of the vibrancy went away for a short time, and it's starting to come back. But again, we're talking about the word vacancy. So there's a connection to appearance. And so I'd like to circle back to Denise and ask Denise, what can Main Streets do where there may be some vacant storefronts and the appearance of them might be a little bit shaky? What's your experience, Denise?
So I would thank you for asking that. As you know, the core of what we do at Renaissance focuses around investing in beautification and community development as a way of generating community pride and engaging volunteers. It's kind of where the rubber meets the road, we say. So before I would look at the vacant buildings, I would turn my attention to the buildings that are occupied and encourage that type of aesthetic improvement. We talk a lot about the fact that how your business presents itself from the curb is marketing for your business. So a successful business would benefit even further, or may already benefit from curb appeal. And there are things you can do that are free, like just clean your windows and sweep the front of your storefront, and you can invest further beyond that. So we try to turn our attention toward aesthetics as a way of showing that there is an investment in the community. We've seen and heard anecdotally from others who have looked at communities, and we know this also to be a fact, but in our experience, that when they see that a community cares about how it looks and cares for itself, it gives them a sense of security about their own investment and their interest in being there. There's a lot of creative ways, creative placemaking ways to deal with empty buildings. First and foremost, obviously code enforcement comes into play there, and you really need to have the cooperation and the partnership with your local municipality to be sure that just because a building is empty doesn't mean it has to look abandoned and dilapidated. It could be empty and still present itself, and there are many creative ways to do that, from dressing windows to using facades and other things. But we need to start with the basics, which is just let's clean things up a little bit and make sure that it looks like someone cares and that someone is paying attention, because blight and those types of abandoned, forgotten spaces lead to other issues. And we know that as well, that leads to crime and a sense of insecurity and feeling unsafe. So we start with aesthetics because it's very, there's a very easy doorway in working with a small business owner to say, simply clean your windows, minimize your signage. More is not necessarily better, less is more in the case of what you display. And we offer that type of support and assistance. And we know that it works because if you feel safe or something draws your attention, then you want to get out of your car and you want to explore. And then if you have that type of traffic and foot traffic or interest, you do see that it spreads, and you see it's a classic economic development scenario. I imagine that where there's investment and people see success, they'll want to invest more. So we can start very simply by looking at aesthetics and then work from there, and using simple grassroots approaches or relying on code enforcement. obviously code enforcement takes time and there's a process there as well. So it doesn't happen overnight.
Sure. Thanks, Denise. And speaking of code enforcement, and I wanted to circle over to Mary. Mary, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the story of Beacon. Back in the early 90s, vacancies galore, bombed out buildings. It was a horrible little Main Street. Codes, cleanliness, investment. Mary, finish the story.
Correct. And it sort of follows the New Rochelle as well, the same situation, and both are very good success stories today. I think, what we typically do is, as a lender, when we go into the community and we're asked to lend on a particular project, and we look at the community assessment. We call it our community assessment model. And we look at the infrastructure, and I just don't mean physical infrastructure. We look at the physical infrastructure, the political infrastructure, the economic infrastructure, the social and the development infrastructure to make sure that this is a place where, that new investment is going to work and catch on. From a physical infrastructure, we talk about the critical mass of the existing properties. Is there some critical mass? Are there some development opportunities? How many people live in the downtown? What is the population potential with new infrastructure or investment in new infrastructure? Is there enough to provide critical mass for a 24-hour population? What are the other development opportunities in this targeted area? Political infrastructure, local political support of planned redevelopment. What are the local zoning regulations? Do they encourage redevelopment? Do they encourage repopulation of the downtown? If not, can they be changed to accommodate that? Economic infrastructure, sufficient market demand for the proposed development or housing or commercial use to support it. What are the existing market rents? Are there comps in the market? Is there market for sales? If so, what are the numbers? What would market sales in excess of the development costs? Are there gaps? What's the median incomes? What are the retail rents? So we look at all of that infrastructure as well. And then development, boots on the ground. Is there an existing community-based partner that you can work with that's capable of administering some public funds and facilitating census among the stakeholders? What types of developments has the local partner done thus far? What types of development has the local partner facilitated? Does the local partner enjoy the support of the city? Has the local partner secured any public or private investments? Is there a downtown transportation hub? So these are the kinds of things that we would sort of survey in advance. Social infrastructure. The targeted area must be located in a social development. The district, does it have any attractions that will draw visitors to the commercial or the downtown area? What are the cultural institutions in this existing downtown Main Street area? Are there opportunities for the development of additional anchors in these areas? Does the local partner or another entity plan events to bring people downtown? What is the competition in the area? Those kinds. And then lastly, just the development partnerships. And incentives. Does the district or the downtown or the municipality offer any development incentives? Typically the cost to redevelop these buildings are often sometimes higher than building new construction. So as a lender, we try to, maximize the amount of private debt, and then we look to fill the gaps with public subsidy or debt. So, later on, Denise is going to, or whoever is going to talk about what incentives the Main Street program has, but DHCR also has their new loan participation program for small buildings, small mixed use buildings in the downtown areas. That's been a very successful program to help bring back some of the vacant structures there on the main streets. There's some CBD funding cities and municipalities have been very creative in using some of that to help incentivize some of the development in the downtown. There's home funds, tax incentives, 444A, 485A, 485B, 581A. These also help, again, to leverage as much debt as we can from the private side and then fill the gaps with public subsidy. We've seen a lot of success there in Beacon, from literally knocking on doors back in the 90s to find out like even who owned the building and why there was no residents living upstairs, to the vibrant use of, you see Main Street today. David talked about 1,000 units within 5 minutes. Well, I think that Beacon is just about there. They rezoned their Main Street zoning to allow for increased density in their downtown, and they've got a number of units underdeveloped. As a matter of fact, I live in that community. You can't walk in Beacon on a weekend now, so it's the success is there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
And so that brings up another question, because you're talking about foot traffic, and foot traffic is absolutely critical to that bricks and mortar storefront that we all love to enjoy on a Main Street. However, there's been an explosion of online shopping, and it's really changed business models, and it's changed the way that businesses compete, and they've had to develop a new business model. So I'd like to turn the conversation or the question over to Larisa. What has been your experience in looking at, or businesses looking at, a new way to capture that missing piece, if you will, from their businesses?
Sure. I tend to approach this from the perspective of, we work with public sector clients and business improvement districts. And my question is always, what is their role in helping businesses and helping a district overcome or address some of the changes that we've seen in the marketplace. Certainly, we've seen that businesses, many businesses need to begin to find ways to sell online. And restaurants in particular really obviously embraced delivery during the pandemic and really jumped leaps and bounds ahead of where they were before the pandemic. So I think that's one sort of silver lining that's come out of this. But ultimately, we are stewards of the downtown environment, and our role is not necessarily to run the businesses. In fact, it is not to run the businesses. It's to help what I call stage the customer. Make sure that, from the moment someone leaves their home, that their ability to get downtown, we make it easy and comfortable and convenient, whether they're driving, walking, biking, and that their experience when they're there is really meaningful. That's the piece of the experience that cannot be replicated online. So the activities, the placemaking, as we come out of COVID, how do we make sure downtown becomes the community gathering place that Jared mentioned, that it is in fact, our heart and soul, the heart and souls of our community. So, I think that's the strategy that we're talking about. How do you activate place? How do you make sure place becomes an addition, an amenity to the thing that you buy in the store? And then helping make sure that the store is able to drive sales through a variety of mediums, omni-channel, and is online and in the store. So I think it's, the right approach is a mix of both of those things.
Sure. Thanks, Larisa. Jared, what are your thoughts about the storefront capturing the customer? Is there an online presence in the back room, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think what we're seeing is now the blending of lots of different sectors, right? So whether it's office or home work or retail, food production, beer and alcohol production, art making, right? Making of all kinds. All of that is blending. It wouldn't be weird to find a coffee roaster in the lobby of an office building, right? Or certainly in the lobby of a boutique hotel. I mean, we've seen that launch entire neighborhoods in places like Portland, Oregon, et cetera. It was once odd to mash up these uses, right? And I think that is a result of, fear over noxious fumes, right, in industrial production. But we took it too far and we spread everything out. And today it's our job, I think, to take compatible uses and try to get them close to each other so that the human experience is extremely vibrant. I mean, so many Americans travel to Europe, right, as vacation because they're getting a wonderfully vibrant experience. There's no reason why we need to travel to get that. I mean, we should be getting that in every community that we live in. Honestly, we owe it to ourselves to provide that for people while they're living, while they're here, right? We all deserve that experience in the place where we live.
Very good. So lots of experiences, and as I indicated early when I was introducing the panel, you're all from a very different geography, if you will, and you're working in different areas of the country and in the region. In your experiences, thinking through the Hudson Valley or other areas, when we hear about best success stories, the Beacons of the world, the Hudsons of the world, the New Rochelles of the world, they're very different cities. New Rochelle, Lower Westchester, connected to New York City. Beacon, mid Hudson Valley, connected to the city by train. Hudson, really part of the Capital District, very small city, half the size it used to be back in the 50s. They all have great success stories. What are some of your experiences and other success stories that you've been part of? Let's start with Denise.
Thanks, Joe. So interesting that the way you phrased the connections that some of the main streets have to other places. And Sullivan County, I would say, is in some ways landlocked from some of those things. We say we're the gateway to the Catskills. We're between the Shawangaks and the Catskills, the Delaware to the Hudson. But we obviously have a large and growing second home and commuter community, especially COVID. A lot of people found their way to Sullivan. Our success stories really, I think, began slowly again in the western part of the county, where people found those places initially as second homes or relocated here and then found a way to invest here and open a business here, sometimes attributable to the ability to be online. I recently was in a shop in one of our small communities and I picked up a pair of pants that were listed for $320. And I said, oh, I can't imagine this selling for $320 in this demographic where I live, but they also sell online. So just to touch on that for a moment, some of the online benefit is that, it can help you pay your bills. If you can sell those products to a broader audience, you can maintain your Main Street presence for the local community and still create that experience. So in Sullivan, some of our most vibrant main streets, when I think about them in your question, are connected to natural resources in some way. So Livingston Manor, you can get, you have the whole, it's the backyard, great, small town, big backyard is how they promote themselves because you have access to the Catskills and to the hiking. Callicoon, Narrowsburg, the Delaware River. So there's this sort of anchor for them of natural resources, which really makes Sullivan County such a unique place. I know we have that throughout the region, but we just have this draw here for these resources. And recently, obviously, the development in Hurleyville, which has the rail trail, and we're working very closely with. I just want to shout out to our partners at Sullivan County Planning and several municipalities to really look at our access to the O&W and how to make that connection through our county and then the connection to the main streets that it touches on. So our successes, I think, are attributable also to that merger of people coming to the area and the natural resources that kind of provide the backdrop to the main streets. In so many cases, those main streets, literally, the backdrop is the natural resource. In Narrowsburg, obviously the river is right there, and same with Callicoon. But our greatest success story, I want to say, is just starting to happen. And I'm going to say that that's going to be the village of Monticello. And it's sort of the underdog in Main Street, but we have a fabulous, and this speaks to main streets as well, is how people will we can bring people together for a common good. And for Village of Monticello, that's where we're focusing with our partners right now. So if we have this conversation again, maybe in 2 years, maybe not 1 year, but maybe 2 years, I think we'll be telling the story of the success of Broadway in Monticello. So more to come there.
Absolutely. And we will have this conversation again, Denise. So thank you. You're welcome to come back, hopefully before 2 years. Let's move over to Larisa. Your experiences in a successful Main Streets. You've been all over the place. Where you are now, what's going on?
Sure. I think about probably the first Main Street community where I did work, which is in Middletown, Connecticut. A small town, not unlike, some of the Hudson River towns. And part of the strategy there, which I think made it so successful, was engaging partners and creating a downtown steward. And in that case, having someone whose job every day, they woke up every single day and cared about, the businesses downtown, the environment downtown, what kinds of activities, how can we promote downtown? How can we make sure, the empty abandoned building, which was a former armory, can become a hotel, which it did, or the shopping center that, was dying could become a movie theater, which it did. That kind of stewardship, I think, is really critical to the long-term success of these efforts. And that project was just amazing. That the partnerships and collaborations, successful Main Streets don't happen because of one business or, one individual. They occur because of partnerships, and you need an organization or an entity whose job is to find consensus for action, to serve as the intermediary in all of this, for the public partners who bring public resources and our private partners who bring private resources and investment. And so I would say, Main Street is such an excellent example of that. And this stuff takes a long time, that was, I would say real success was maybe 10 or 15 years, when people started noting the real significant changes. So that's, and any success story that I really look at always has that as part of it.
Sure. Thanks, Larisa. And you mentioned the term developing that local champion, if you will. And a shameless plug for ourselves. That's something our center is going to focus on, is creating these local champions. Somebody, like you said, wakes up every day and thinks nothing except Main Street. What can I do today to promote this Main Street and make it work? Jared, some of the success stories that you've seen.
Right. So I was thinking about the way the question was framed, right? And in my mind, it's sort of like successful to who, successful for who, right? And in Havistra, right, this is in my mind, my success story. What does success mean, right? And in Havistra, it meant bringing disposable income in an already established, like highly vibrant, diverse restaurant district. Downtown Havistra, within pretty much 2 square blocks, has over 25 restaurants crammed together. It's absolutely incredible, from many different, food from many different countries. So the thinking was, how do we make people comfortable, right, getting within close proximity of people that they never go near, right? And so we had to create an event called the Food Crawl in downtown Havistra, and it brings nearly 5,000 people on an annual basis into this 2-block area. It socializes them. It's not so bad. It's not what I heard, right? The food's really good. Maybe I'll come back. And we've seen, since we started this event, we've seen the demographics of who's sitting in these restaurants change. It's absolutely incredible. Like that's what integration looks like, right? And that's what we have to do. And we can't just do it through food, right? We have to do it through what kind of businesses and job opportunities are located in these highly diverse downtowns, in these high density downtowns, and the kinds of housing that's available, right? So we can't warehouse affordable housing in urban areas. Can't do that, right? We have to have affordable housing spread across communities. And we also have to have high-end housing spread across communities, right? The goal is integration and walkable integration, right? We can't let other issues blind us from that fact, right? We have to get people together if we're going to have highly functional economies. So yeah, that's my story.
Very good. And Jared, you bring up a lot of really good points there. One is how do you mitigate displacement, not only for the residents, but also the businesses? And you bring up affordable housing. So my question naturally goes back to Mary in terms of housing. And so Mary, most of the deals that that CPC works on throughout the Hudson Valley and the main streets, they're affordable housing, but it's a mixed income approach. And maybe you could talk to how positive a mixed income development works for a main street. People bringing disposable income to the main street, but yet housing the locals who need it.
Yeah, and density is the key. The more feet on the ground, the more walkable the neighborhood, the more traffic you're going to get into your retail and businesses. But yes, I think blending diversity in terms of background and as well as income levels is important to stabilize a community. And I think that this, I look at Beacon, and when Beacon started and New Rochelle started, they didn't have a Main Street downtown anchor grant available. They didn't have the DRI available, so the state has come a long way in recognizing the importance of downtowns and have created programs to help enhance them. But going back, what was key in New Rochelle was the bid. I mean, they had a bid. They had a bid director that was vibrant and out there, and they said, well, look, we need to increase our density. They recognized, they gave a tax pilot to a very large developer who built a tower, the first, Avalon Tower there, which brought people. And I believe that they revised their zoning to include inclusionary zoning. And so 10% of that housing had to be affordable to the local folks at, I believe it was 80% of AMI. So inclusionary zoning is one way to also, despite the fact there's a lot of private debt, the public debt is important, or the public subsidy is important, and they do tie a lot of the public subsidy to affordability. And for the most recent program that I talked about, the state's new small building loan participation program, that's at 80% of AMI. You can get subsidies for the housing portion of a mixed income, a mixed use building, and 80% of AMI in the Hudson Valley is market rate rent. So that's the first of many that we've seen that, you're supporting a market rate rent. Those folks have disposable income. So that's key. And many of the urban centers have been the hubs of affordable housing in the past because that's where the infrastructure is. It's hard to build a 80 unit, where you don't have water sewer. So many of these downtowns, villages, they have the water sewer. So again, blending income levels and I think, as Joe pointed out, is important. Thanks,
Mary. And we had a really good question come in on the Q&A box. And Larisa, I'm gonna put this question to you. What experience have any of you had, Larisa, in dealing with absentee landlords who just don't want to engage, but yet they own a significant piece of real estate on the main street or bordering the main street? Larisa?
Sure. So, one of the first things we usually do when we go into a community is, understand who owns what in a downtown. If you're looking at the 2-block radius, actually for Mount Vernon, we worked on 4th Street, 4th Avenue, and looked at underlying property ownership. And there were absolutely, and there always are, property owners who will not engage, who are absentee. And my recommendation is never, unless it's the most important lot in town at the most important corner in town. I think that the lowest hanging fruit isn't to try to turn those people first, right? The lowest hanging fruit is to identify the property owners who are interested in engaging, and business owners who are interested in participating, because we have to remember, we can only influence these partners. We don't control their decisions. So very wise, Main Street expert Kennedy Smith, once said, when you start this work, 20% of the people are going to be for you, 20% of the people are going to be against you, and the rest are going to wait and see. If you start with the property owners who are completely recalcitrant and don't even take your phone calls, this is going to be an uphill battle. And in this work, you need early successes. You need to demonstrate credibility. You need to show that you can get something done. And so I would say, ignore them if you can, and really work to identify who you can work with. And in Mount Vernon, in fact, one of the things we noted was that, the second block was made up of a number of public properties owned by different entities within Mount Vernon. And that was an opportunity for, in fact, a public assemblage. They had more control over that block than they really even realized they did. So, that's an easier lift, right? To manage and deal with the property over which you have control than to deal with property owners who, for whatever reason, are not willing to engage.
Thanks, Larisa. And, how should I say this? Speaking of vacant properties and blighted properties, a lot of times that does happen in the rural areas. And Denise, Sullivan County, there was a lot of vacant properties. And I know that Sullivan Renaissance was a critical component of your strategic plan in getting those things accomplished, the revitalization. So what's going on up in Sullivan in terms of dealing with vacant properties?
Well, there's many moving parts. It's an ongoing challenge and mostly driven by how engaged a municipality might be. But I think Larisa's point is critical and important. If we spend all of our time and resources focusing on the bad actors, that's where we're going to spend our time and resources, and everything else just sort of falls away. And then apathy comes from there. So I love that you point out to start with the ones that, are interested and willing, the low hanging fruit, which is what we have continued to do. We've worked with our municipalities to, through our municipal partnership program, we support code enforcement. And so we've worked with them to try to implement some strategies to address those types of issues. We're fortunate in Sullivan County now to have the Sullivan County Land Bank, which has been is robust and very active, specifically in the villages of Liberty and Monticello. They've been a great partner for us. So we have multiple pathways, and none of them are the total answer. And sometimes a vacant property owner may have a local representative, someone here who's sort of their eyes and ears, because we have found in some cases that if a property owner is not from here, they may not even know, or they may not know what the condition of that property is. So we have had some successes when we've been able to make a personal connection with someone who's not currently in the area. But, so we're sort of still chipping away at it. And some of it happens gradually. They decide to sell their property. That's the best. And then the person who buys it reinvests in it. So it's many, many moving parts, but it's definitely leagues better than it was when we started 21 years ago, but it's certainly not attributable solely to our work. We're just one piece of many moving pieces and a puzzle trying to, come together. And always open to ideas. I'm sorry.
Denise, can I jump in and add something, Denise? You
said
something that really made me recall some work I did in DC many years ago in actually Mount Vernon Square, where the local organization identified property owners who, for whatever reason were out of compliance, and brought in the buildings department and started writing letters to their attorneys, and just was a nag. it was a complete nag to these property owners because every time they received a letter, they had to engage their attorney to respond. And that actually helped turn over and get, number of property owners to sell. So I thought that was an interesting strategy that, what you said reminded me of that.
If obviously with the market right now, everybody thinks they're sitting on a gold mine on every level. So, but it is just one other tool. And the more that communities have activity and this is where the volunteer piece, which is the heart of what we do, is engaging volunteers. The more that volunteers get involved and are engaged in that way, and the more they can push a little on their municipality and show that there's community interest as well. That it's just like, I don't want to say political pressure, but it's more about a municipality knowing that they have a constituency that finds this important. So they might direct their interests there. And we're always, I took a lot of notes during this part of the conversation because we're always looking for new ideas.
Thanks, Denise. Jared, did you want to add to that before we get to the final question? Because we are running a little bit short on time.
Right. So just echo what everyone said. I think Larisa was kind of alluding to this, but you have to change the frame that these people are functioning within. And you could do it by pulling a lot of different levers, right? Some of them are carrots and some of them are sticks. And there's a lot of tools available to municipal governments and local organizations, I think, to compel property owners to sell or develop or, improve, right? So, it's just hard to know what those levers are. Right? Every municipality and local government has a different level of sophistication and or different priorities. And someone in the Q&A mentioned governments turn over. So it's really difficult. And so this is why I think an organization like yours is so critically necessary, because we have to educate. We really do. And everyone, not just, political leaders, like everyone. So that when they do become a political leader, they're already ready to enact these good changes.
Absolutely. And Jared, the great segue to the last question, and you've already answered it. What do you all see the center providing? How best can we be of assistance in the communities that you all work in? Mary, we'll start with you.
Again, we've done after the success in New Rochelle, so to speak, we were tapped by a number of the communities to come show us how you did it there. And it's like, we didn't do it. It's like the community did it. And everybody was sort of lockstep in this, marching in the same direction. And that's also the key, one of the keys for Beacon. I mean, they didn't have a bid, they didn't have any of that, but they had a mayor, Clara Gould, who was in office and a political infrastructure that sort of all beat to the sound of the same drum for many years. And she was reelected, and there was just stability in there. And when she left office, someone from the Common Council who was already lock, stock, and barrel on the same, walking in the same strides, took over. So that's, I think, as I mentioned earlier, political infrastructure is really important. And if there isn't a will from them, then a lot of it can't happen. But what was the question? I forgot. I sort of went off on a tangent.
That's okay. How best can the center, influence the Main Street?
Oh, so I think the tools in the basket, so we would have them, and we go through them all the time. So having the resource center and the resources. I mean, we've done, and Larisa and I've done many of these conferences that parking is always an issue, and vacant storefronts are, so those are easy. I think if we were in the resource center now, there's lots of, success stories on, and every community is different. So you're bound to find a community that's similar to yours, and how did they sort of overcome that particular obstacle. So I think that's going to be key to participants of the center. I'm looking forward to it. I'm happy to add my tools in your toolbox as well. So.
Oh, you'll definitely be playing a role. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
And we're running out of time. So Denise, Larisa, 30 seconds. How can we help?
Go ahead, Larisa.
Denise. Two things. I think you want to make sure people don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think you want to give them networks and camaraderie and partnerships. This can be very lonely work sometimes. And, that's what your network's going to do.
Very good. And Denise?
I think what everyone has said, I just, even just being here today, just that hearing other best practices, ideas, things that have worked in other places. But beyond that, if you could also help, this may have been said, if people are identifying a trend of a need or a recurring issue and maybe don't have the time or the capacity to figure out the answer, if the center could help bring solutions to problems that seem to be, like you did a nice poll. So if there are solutions out there, so we don't have to go out and necessarily do the legwork to research or reinvent. It's easy. Like I loved what you said about a downtown steward. I feel like that's a brilliant idea and something very doable. So bringing us solutions and ideas would be to relevant issues for the Hudson Valley.
Sure.
Just to add to that really quick, and I know we need to wrap up, right? So definitely let's not create more material that other people have already created, right? There's a lot out there, right? Instead, I think what we should focus on, right? And I think what the organization should focus on is creating a framework or a heuristic so that we can evangelize other people to do this work, because there aren't enough of us. There just aren't enough of us, and there aren't enough people that understand this complex system, which is a Main Street, right? Yeah, and absolutely. If we can give them a lens through which to see it, to solve these problems on their own, we're going to make a lot of difference. Yeah,
absolutely, Jared. And I like to say in the housing world, there's no single solution to get to the end. And you need to speak to those local strengths and the framework, as you put it. And that's a great segue. Thank you all so much. This is fabulous information. We've captured a lot of the questions that we didn't have time to get to, and we'll post those up on the center's new website coming up over the course of the next couple of months. So thank you again. And I'd like to roll into our special guest now, speaking of solutions, Patricia O'Reilly. Patricia is the director of the New York Main Street program at the New York State Homes and Community Renewal, otherwise known as the acronym of HCR. Patricia also manages the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, the DRI, and their projects that have been assigned to HCR, as well as the Buffalo Main Street Initiative program developed through the Better Buffalo Fund. Patricia comes to our presentation, our morning session here, with over 13 years at HCR, and she's worked with over 175 communities throughout New York State. Patricia actually grew up here in the Hudson Valley and resides currently in Central New York. Good morning, Patricia. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll turn the con over to you.
Thanks, Joe. So good morning. A lot of great discussions and presentations so far. Like Joe said, I am the director of the New York Main Street program at HCR, also manage our Buffalo Main Street initiative and all the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, or DRI projects that are signed to HCR. We are working about 100 different projects in the 40 DRI communities that are existing, and there are the DRI 5 communities are being announced this week as of now. So more to come for the DRI for sure. So the New York Main Street program is one of the state's economic development or community development programs, seeking to transform mixed-use neighborhoods and strengthen their economic vitality through sustainable downtown revitalization. We're really, as urban professionals, and similar to what a lot of the other speakers have been touching on today, we know that dense, walkable downtowns are really the key ingredient to achieving climate goals and strengthening economic vitality, as well as recovering from the pandemic. Like in many other facets, diversity is the key to sustainability, and our mixed-use urban areas are really our biggest opportunity for resiliency. So whether that's diversity in use or commerce, culturally, programming, I think all these different facets of how diverse our downtowns can be has really been touched on. And one thing I'm going to focus on is that actual investment in our building stock. Next slide. So a little bit about Homes and Community Renewal. HCR is made up of 5 different agencies and it has 2 main development offices. So we have our Office of Finance and Development, a little bit of what Mary was touching on. Those are our low-income housing tax credits, bonds. Those are things that she works on and she had touched on a little bit. And then we have our Office of Community Renewal, where the New York Main Street program is housed. So OCR works with really our local grant programs that provide grants to municipalities and not-for-profit organizations. So OCR programs operate using what we refer to as the local program administrator approach, or LPA. HCR provides grants to municipalities and not-for-profits who become the LPA and then are responsible for administering the grant locally. Then they grant or loan funds to individual property owners and businesses. The LPAs make the local funding decisions and are responsible for compliance with program rules. So if you are a building or business owner downtown and you're interested in participating in this program, you're going to reach out to your local municipality or a not-for-profit organization that's doing community and economic development in your downtown. Next. So the New York Main Street program is a state grant resource that provides financial resources and technical assistance to rehabilitate upper story housing, commercial spaces, and mixed-use buildings in commercial districts, as well as adjacent neighborhoods. The program stimulates reinvestment in properties with the goal of establishing a sustainable downtown and neighborhood revitalization. So this is a general eligible activities include facade renovations, commercial fit out, residential creation, as well as streetscape enhancement and some technical assistance activities as well. So these activities are really organized under 4 application categories or project types that include target area building renovation, that also includes the streetscape component, downtown anchor renovation, downtown stabilization, as well as technical assistance studies. So how to apply? The New York Main Street grant is available through the Consolidated Funding Application, or CFA. It opens up generally in May. Applications are due in July and generally announced in December. So the 2021 funding round through the CFA has not yet been announced, but should be this month. We generally have about $2 to $5 million available annually to provide in grants, and we generally receive 15 to 20 million in requests. So the application, the program is super competitive. So we always like to make sure that our communities have all the resources that they need in order to be successful through this program. So this is a general list of activities that are eligible for reimbursement through this program. Again, it's majorly a focus on building renovation. Most building renovation projects that involve permanent, hard installed components are eligible under the program. If awarded, the LPA is responsible for determining priorities for the New York Main Street funds within a designated target area. We recommend that LPAs use the Main Street funds to leverage more comprehensive renovation projects. So an LPA can award funding for, say, a necessary roof replacement or repair, but also making that contingent upon addressing code violations, reopening up a storefront, improving awning or signage. So the local community is really responsible for being able to leverage those funds and get what they really want out of this resource. Some activities that We cannot include acquisition, new construction, demolition, furnishing, site work, things like that. So some of these are important to downtown redevelopment, but this grant resource is for rehab only. So getting further into those 4 application categories or project types. So often our local program administrators or property owners do not have the administrative or financial capacity to do a lot of the work up front to be able to tackle a building renovation project. So we created the New York Main Street Technical Assistance activity to help improve readiness and participate in a future renovation activity. So maybe you have that big white elephant property that's been sitting vacant that you just don't even know what to do with. The technical assistance funds can be used to do an adaptive reuse study or feasibility analysis to really help determine what the potential new uses could be for that building. Maybe the community does not have solid design guidelines, but property owners are interested in participating in a facade renovation program. Just some ideas of what you can use the technical assistance funds for. So, you know, we obviously do projects all over the state, but I wanted to highlight what of your neighboring communities and partners are working on with use through this program. So we have the Village of Spring Valley in Rockland County use technical assistance funds to create design guidelines for their entire downtown. And now they can have that document that they can use as a precipice for development and rehab projects. We also have the Merck Project, who is working with the town of Andes in Delaware County. They also created a design guideline document. They subsequently applied for target area building renovation grant now that they had that initial resource, and are now using that to develop scopes of work for projects that are participating in their building renovation program. So once you do complete your technical assistance activity, we do expect you to come in for the actually building renovation funds to use those tools that you've been able to create to actually put them to work into creating better guidelines for your downtown. So downtown stabilization funds are also another avenue as a first step in tackling those larger projects. This project activity is intended to eliminate barriers to redevelopment of downtown mixed-use buildings. Maybe there's a major asbestos issue preventing a building renovation project from moving forward. Maybe the building just needs to be stabilized due to structural issues before a full renovation project can be considered. So keep this activity in mind if you have a project that can't seem to get to the rehab stage because of some type of prohibited pre-development obstacle. Many of those white elephant buildings are filled with asbestos or had a previous contamination on the site. Really anything that's preventing the building from being reused and actually contributing to your downtown. So we have communities applying for this type of activity as well. So right now, the Village of Athening in Westchester County is using the stabilization funds to conduct environmental testing, complete remediations, as well as conduct renovations in a key downtown building. This was at 200 Main Street. There's hazardous materials remediation, plumbing, electrical renovations are really helping to prepare this vacant property for redevelopment. So normally someone doesn't want to purchase it. A developer does not want to tackle all those unknowns or those pre-development expenses. So this is an opportunity to get all that work done so it's ready to move forward into contributing to your downtown. So this project was also included, I think, as part of the DRI application. So ultimately, this might also receive some downtown revitalization funds to convert it into a privately owned opportunity to bring more contribution to the downtown. So the target area building renovation program is our probably most popular activity. It's where you apply for a pool of funding to assist multiple projects in your downtown or Main Street. You can request up to $500,000 for this activity, but we definitely recommend a lower request. Even the most experienced or prepared administrators do struggle to use a full $500,000 in the required 2-year term. And successfully spending a smaller grant on time will help you secure future funds as well. An application for a target area building renovation funds must clearly document a sufficient pool of interested property owners. So we want to see that you've done your legwork ahead of time, have potential projects already lined up. These are a lot of work. It's essential that an applicant also shows advanced planning, development of local procedures, and has a clear understanding of program rules. With this activity, you can also request up to $15,000 to complete a streetscape project that will help complement the renovations that you're completing in your target area. So a couple projects that are going on right now. Catskill Mountain Housing Development Corporation is working with a couple communities in Greene County, administering their target area building renovation programs, tackling a number of mixed-use projects. Sullivan County, where Denise talked a lot about, so we also, the Monticello is working on redeveloping 3 specific mixed-use properties, and Peekskill also has a project in their Monument Park neighborhood where they're working on several different buildings to help redevelop them to start contributing to the downtown. A lot of these buildings are partially vacant, their upper stories are vacant. There's a lot, looking to bring new businesses in or more business or expand a business. So this is an opportunity to bring some funding into the downtown to help redevelop these properties. So although not a New York Main Street project, the city of Middletown created a facade improvement program with a portion of their downtown revitalization initiative funds. So these are 3 adjacent buildings on North Street. You can see there's incongruent window sizes and shapes, the old metal storefronts that are a bit closed off, as well as a lot of irregular signage. So they received about $75,000 each was put into each of these buildings with downtown revitalization initiative funds. And so you can see the major difference of how this is now contributing to their downtown. They used a single architect to tackle each one of these buildings. As you can see, now all the windows are congruent. They meet historic requirements, triple requirements. They use a consistent color scheme and design, and it really helps contribute to that public realm of downtown. So again, this isn't a necessarily New York Main Street project, but similar to what you can do for your community with Main Street funds. So I talked a little bit about the streetscape enhancement opportunities. So in addition to renovating buildings, communities may also desire to improve the public realm of downtown. The streetscape activity can be used for enhancements to the public right-of-way, to broaden the pedestrian experience and help generate a sense of place. This activity is ancillary to a target area building renovation program, so it can't be applied for on its own, but is a supplement. So the last activity that you can apply for through this program is a downtown anchor project. So this allows for a single significant investment in a single building. For this reason, we do require more firm and detailed documentation with the application. So we want to see clear financial commitments and plans for construction financing. We also want to see that the project has local municipal support and that the proposed project is sustainable. So we don't want to invest $500,000 into a single building if the business or building cannot be reasonably maintained. So we do have a few more requirements when submitting an application to this program. So just some examples in your neighboring communities. BSC Creative is using downtown acre renovation funds to assist in the rehabilitation of a historic former schoolhouse building in Newburgh. I believe they're creating a state-of-the-art film and TV production facility as well as community center. And the city of New Rochelle is using downtown acre renovation funds to renovate a previously vacant downtown building into a multi-use community creative arts focused venue. The renovated building will also house a restaurant, event space for artistic performances, as well as meeting and workspace. So super multi-use, diverse project. Both of these are in progress and are expected to complete the end of next year. So if you are interested in participating in this program, again, if you are a building or business owner on your main street or downtown, you're going to want to reach out to your local municipality or local not-for-profit organization to apply on your behalf. Just some important things to consider when you're evaluating your implementation capacity. If you are an applicant, really help determining as whether you're ready to apply for the program. I think a lot of the things that the panel talked about in terms of already having things going on downtown and having core partnerships, a venue for that is important as a first step. You really want to evaluate any strengths and weaknesses that an organization might have, and definitely contact us to help and discuss your projects. We're available anytime, even though the application round generally opens up in May. We're available all year long to just chat about potential projects or potential avenues and what makes sense in terms of how to get this money into your community. So we definitely want to hear from you. Again, this is a grant source, is part of the consolidated funding application that is expected to open up in May. And again, reach out with any questions anytime for any potential projects. This is my contact information. I'm also happy to answer any questions that you might have now.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Wonderful presentation. I did put in the chat box that all the slides will be made available. And looking at the list of your last slide, all of those questions. Another role for the center. We're happy to assist and work obviously with HCR to provide some of those potential solutions. So thank you so much for the presentation. I'm not seeing any questions through the box right now, but as we get them, we'll absolutely send them over to you, Patricia. And it's 11 o'clock, so thanks. Thanks to the panel, thanks to David, and I'd like to turn this back over to Eric for closing remarks.
Okay, yep. Thanks, Joe. So we are right at 11 o'clock. Just wanted to thank everyone for attending the inaugural Main Street Hudson Valley Annual Conference, and a big thanks to all of our presenters, David Dixon and Patricia O'Reilly, and to our panelists, Denise, Larisa, Mary, and Jared. Thanks so much, guys. I know I learned a lot today from today's session. I really appreciate the thoughtful questions and suggestions from the audience. Just a lot of great discussion and insight into the theme of today's conference, which is why Main Street matters. So thanks again, everyone. One last time, I would like to encourage everyone who is interested in the new Main Street Hudson Valley initiative, whether it be a question, comment, suggestion, anything in between, to please visit our website or reach out to me directly, because we would really love to connect with you all more about that. There is a place on the website right now where you can write in a topic that you think we should focus on that wasn't on that poll, or if you just didn't get a chance to participate in that poll. And definitely check out the website, check back in the coming months as we continue to build out this initiative. So thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the